I woke up that morning with the kind of tight excitement that makes your hands feel slightly numb. Graduation day. The day that was supposed to prove something not just to the world, but to the people who raised me. I showered longer than usual, letting the water run hot over my shoulders while I rehearsed the moment in my head. Scanning the crowd, spotting my parents, seeing them stand when my name was called. I imagined my mother's smile, my father lifting his phone to record. I imagined it because imagining had always been safer than asking. I laid my gown across my bed like it was something fragile. Navy blue, heavy in a way that made it feel earned. I smoothed it twice, then checked my phone. No messages yet. It was still early. They'd probably text when they were on their way. They always ran late. That was fine. I told myself that was fine. The campus was already buzzing when I arrived. Families clustered everywhere. Parents adjusting caps, siblings holding flowers, grandparents squinting at programs. The air smelled like sunscreen and fresh paper. I stood in line with other graduates, all of us pretending we weren't nervous, pretending this wasn't a before and after moment. Someone next to me laughed softly and said, "My mom hasn't stopped crying." I smiled back. I didn't say anything about mine. When we were ushered into the seating area, that's when I started scanning the stands. Row by row, faces blurred together at first. I stopped looking for faces and started looking for shapes instead. My father's posture, the way my mother tilted her head when she listened. Nothing. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. "It's okay," I muttered under my breath. "They'll be here." When I sat back down, my hands were shaking. I pressed them into my thighs, forcing stillness. I told myself not to cry. Not here. Not now. Crying would make it real, and I wasn't ready for real yet. After the ceremony, the crowd spilled onto the lawn. Laughter. Photos. Hugs. I stood off to the side, clutching my diploma cover like it might disappear if I loosened my grip. I pulled out my phone and typed a message I deleted twice before sending. "Hey, are you close? We're done." Delivered. Then nothing. I waited longer than I should have. Long enough for the sun to shift. Long enough for the seats I'd saved to be taken by strangers who didn't know they were sitting in something that felt like a promise I'd made, and broken, for someone else. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Not just late. Not just inconvenient. Wrong. And I had no idea the silence was only the beginning. When I sat back down, my hands were shaking. I pressed them into my thighs, forcing stillness. I told myself not to cry. Not here. Not now. Crying would make it real, and I wasn't ready for real yet. After the ceremony, the crowd spilled onto the lawn. Laughter. Photos. Hugs. I stood off to the side, clutching my diploma cover like it might disappear if I loosened my grip. I pulled out my phone and typed a message I deleted twice before sending. "Hey, are you close? We're done." Delivered. Then nothing. I waited longer than I should have. Long enough for the sun to shift. Long enough for the seats I'd saved to be taken by strangers who didn't know they were sitting in something that felt like a promise I'd made, and broken, for someone else. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Not just late. Not just inconvenient. Wrong. And I had no idea the silence was only the beginning. By the time I finally left the campus, the lawn was almost empty. Crushed programs littered the grass like shed skin. Someone had dropped a bouquet near the trash can, the petals already wilting in the heat. I walked past it slowly, diploma tucked under my arm, feeling like I was carrying proof of something no one had witnessed. My phone stayed silent the entire drive home. I kept it face up on the passenger seat, glancing at it every red light. A text, a missed call, anything. Nothing came. The longer it stayed quiet, the more I started rehearsing explanations for them in my head. Not excuses, explanations. I needed it to make sense. I needed to believe there was a version of this where they hadn't simply chosen not to come. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the edge of my bed in my graduation gown and stared at the wall. The room smelled faintly of detergent and cardboard boxes. Temporary, like everything else in my life at 20. I took off the cap and set it carefully on my desk, then smoothed the tassel like it might calm me down. That's when my phone buzzed. My chest tightened so fast it almost hurt. Sorry we couldn't make it today. Things came up. We're proud of you. That was it. No call. No explanation. No, are you okay? Just 3 sentences that felt borrowed. Like something you'd write in a card when you don't really know the person. I read it 3 times, trying to find warmth in it. Trying to hear my mother's voice behind the words. I typed back it's okay before I could stop myself. I always said it was okay. That was my reflex. I spent the rest of the evening doing what I'd always done when things didn't feel right. I minimized. I told myself graduations weren't that important. I told myself I was being dramatic. I ordered cheap takeout and ate it straight from the container, scrolling through photos my classmates were posting. Families, smiles, group shots with arms wrapped tight around shoulders. I zoomed in on a few, wondering what it felt like to be certain someone would show up for you. The next day, the disappointment settled into something heavier, a dull ache behind my ribs. I went to work my shift, smiled at customers, answered congratulations with a practiced, thank you. No one asked where my parents were. I was grateful for that. Explaining would have required words I didn't have yet. It wasn't until that evening that the truth slipped through by accident. I was scrolling mindlessly when a familiar face flashed across my screen. My mother's profile picture. She'd posted a photo the day before, same day as my graduation. She was standing beside my father at a backyard barbecue, both of them smiling at the camera, drinks in hand. The caption was casual, cheerful, nothing dramatic. Such a fun afternoon with friends. I stared at the timestamp, same time my name was being called. For a moment, I genuinely thought there had to be a mistake. Maybe it was an old photo. Maybe it uploaded late. I clicked through the comments. People had commented today, laughing emojis, inside jokes. It was current, real. My hands started to shake. It wasn't that they couldn't come. It was that they didn't want to. I sat there longer than I meant to, phone glowing in my hands, feeling something in me rearrange itself. Anger didn't come first. Sadness didn't either. It was confusion. A deep, destabilizing confusion about where I stood in their lives. About how something so important to me could be so easily replaced by something so small to them. I thought about the seats I'd saved. The programs still folded neatly. The way I'd defended their absence to strangers without even being asked. I thought about how natural that had felt, protecting them from disappointment they'd caused me. That night, I didn't text them. I didn't confront them. I didn't ask why. Part of me was afraid of the answer. Another part already knew it. 2 days later, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message was longer. Formal. Written in the tone my parents used when they wanted something but didn't want to sound like they were asking. We need to talk about the $3,500. You'll need to send it by the end of the week. I read it slowly, not understanding at first how it connected to anything. Graduation. Silence. Barbecue. Money. My stomach dropped. I realized, in that moment, that the absence hadn't been the betrayal. It was just the opening act. I read the message again, slower this time, like if I took it word by word it might rearrange itself into something reasonable. We need to talk about the $3,500. You'll need to send it by the end of the week. There was no greeting. No, hope you're doing well. No acknowledgement that I'd just graduated. It landed in my chest like a dropped plate. Sharp, loud, impossible to ignore. I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hands. The same place I'd sat in my gown 2 nights earlier. The room felt smaller than it had before. The walls closer. I tried to remember a time when my parents had mentioned $3,500. I replayed conversations in my head like security footage. Slow, grainy, missing key angles. Nothing. At 20, money already carried weight. Every dollar had a job. Rent. Groceries. Gas. The little emergency fund I guarded like it was fragile. $3,500 wasn't just a number. It was months of careful planning. It was safety. It was sleep. I typed, deleted, retyped. What is this for? The reply came faster than I expected. You know what it's for. We covered you when you needed it. It's time to be responsible. My chest tightened. I scrolled up through old messages, searching for clues. There was no mention of a loan, no agreement, no conditions. I remembered them helping once, years ago, with a car repair when I was barely out of high school. They'd said, "Don't worry about it. We've got you." I believed them. Apparently, belief had interest. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the familiar pull of guilt. The voice that said, "Maybe you forgot." The one that said, "Maybe you owe them more than you realize." I hated how quickly that voice showed up, how trained it was. I wondered how many times I'd absorbed responsibility that wasn't actually mine. I asked again carefully, "Can you explain what the $3,500 is for?" I don't remember agreeing to repay anything. This time, the response was colder. "We're not going to argue about this. You benefited. Now you pay it back." That's how adulthood works. Adulthood. The word sat there like a verdict. I thought about how adulthood had apparently arrived without my consent, arrived with demands, not guidance. I thought about how they'd skipped my graduation, then circled back only when money was involved. The timing made my stomach turn. I didn't respond right away. I needed space to think without their tone filling my head. I called a friend instead, someone a few years older who'd already learned some lessons the hard way. I read the messages out loud. She was quiet for a long moment. "Did you sign anything?" she asked. "No." "Did they ever say it was a loan?" "No." "Then it's not a debt," she said simply. The simplicity of it made me dizzy. That night, I pulled out old bank statements, receipts, emails, anything that could confirm or deny what they were claiming. I found proof of the car repair. The amount didn't match, not even close. There was no paper trail that led to $3,500, just their word, and the expectation that I would comply without question. The next morning, I drafted a response that took me nearly an hour to write. "I've looked through my records, and I don't see anything that shows I owe $3,500. If you can provide documentation or explain what this amount is for, I'm happy to look at it. Otherwise, I can't send money I don't owe." I read it over and over, checking for disrespect, for tone, for anything they could twist into attitude. When I finally sent it, my hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down. The reply didn't come immediately. When it did, it was a single sentence. "If you don't send the money, there will be consequences." I stared at the words, my heart pounding. Consequences. The same word used by teachers, bosses, systems of authority. Not parents. Not people who were supposed to care about your well-being. I felt a flicker of fear then, real fear. Not just about the money, but about how far they were willing to go to enforce their version of reality. I realized, sitting there in my quiet apartment, that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a test. And for the first time in my life, I was considering what would happen if I failed it. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept looping through memories, dragging them into the harsh light of this new accusation. Every time my parents had helped me, every ride, every meal, every small rescue when I was younger, now felt like it was being reevaluated retroactively, as if kindness had an expiration date I'd missed. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of traffic outside my window. At some point, I got up and made tea I didn't drink. The mug went cold in my hands while I tried to make sense of the number again. $3,500. So specific it almost felt rehearsed, like they'd landed on it carefully, chosen a sum that sounded official enough to discourage questions. In the morning, I opened my laptop and started listing everything I could remember them paying for over the years. Not because I agreed I owed it, but because I needed to understand their logic. I wrote it out like an audit, neat columns on a blank document. Car repair, phone bill 1 month, textbooks sophomore year. Next to each, I wrote what I remembered them saying at the time. "Don't worry about it. We'll handle this. This is what parents do." None of it added up to $3,500. And none of it had ever been framed as temporary help. The more I looked at the list, the heavier my chest felt. These weren't loans. They were moments I'd been vulnerable. Moments when I trusted them. Seeing those memories reduced to a balance sheet made something in me recoil. I checked my bank account next, even though I already knew what I'd find. The number sat there, modest but hard-earned. Rent due in 2 weeks. utilities, groceries. I could technically pay them, but it would leave me exposed. One unexpected expense away from panic. I thought about how easily they were asking me to give up that security. How little concern they showed for what it would cost me. I imagined sending the money, the relief they'd feel, the silence that would follow. I'd done that dance before. Fix the problem, absorb the damage, wait for the next demand. There was a part of me that wanted to do it just to make the tension stop. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the graduation they skipped. Maybe it was the photo. Maybe it was the word consequences. Whatever it was, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Paying them wouldn't restore the relationship I wanted. It would just confirm the one they believed they had. I typed another message, slower this time. I'm not refusing to communicate. I just need clarity. If this was a loan, there should be some record or agreement. Without that, I can't send money. I didn't add apologies. That alone felt radical. Their response came an hour later. You're being disrespectful. After everything we've done for you, this is how you act. There it was. The pivot. From money to morality. From facts to feelings. I felt the old guilt rise again. Thick and familiar. The urge to smooth things over, to reassure them I wasn't ungrateful. I set my phone down and took a breath instead. I called another person, an older coworker who'd once mentioned cutting off financial help from family. She listened quietly, then said, "Help isn't help if it comes with strings you didn't agree to." That sentence stayed with me. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then again, and again. The messages piled up, each one more urgent, more frustrated. They talked about sacrifice, about respect, about how I was changing. They weren't wrong. I was changing. Slowly, painfully, but clearly. That evening, as I sat at my small kitchen table eating reheated leftovers, my phone buzzed with a final message. "If you don't send the money by Friday, we will take further action." I stared at the screen, my appetite gone. Further action. It sounded official, legal, heavy. I wondered if they really meant it, or if it was just another attempt to scare me into compliance. Either way, the line had been crossed. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was afraid, and I was starting to understand that saying no might cost me more than money. Friday came faster than I expected. The days between felt stretched thin, like time itself was tense. I moved through my routine on autopilot, work, food, sleep, but everything felt slightly off, like I was bracing for impact without knowing when it would come. Every vibration of my phone made my stomach clench. I'd rewritten my response more times than I could count. Each version tried to strike the same balance. Calm but firm, respectful but clear. I knew from experience that emotion would be used against me. Tears would be called manipulation. Anger would be labeled immaturity. So I chose something else. I chose quiet. That morning, I sat at my desk with my laptop open and my phone beside it, both screens reflecting the same thing back at me. My own nervous face. I read through our message thread from the beginning, noticing how quickly the tone had shifted once I stopped agreeing. How fast love had been replaced with language that sounded more like policy. I took a deep breath and typed, "I've thought about this carefully. I'm not able to send $3,500. I don't have documentation that I owe it, and paying it would put me in a difficult financial position. I hope we can talk about this calmly, but my answer is no." I stared at the word no longer than the rest of the message. It looked small, almost fragile, but it was there. When I pressed send, my hands started shaking. Not the dramatic kind, just a subtle tremor that made it hard to keep still. I set the phone down face down on the desk and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My heart was racing like I'd done something dangerous. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then my phone lit up. Not a text. A call. I let it ring. The second call came immediately after. Then a third. I didn't answer any of them. I knew if I did, I'd lose the ground I just claimed. I'd apologize. I'd explain. I'd fold. The messages followed. "You're making a huge mistake. We're trying to help you learn responsibility. Don't do this to yourself. Each one felt less like concern and more like pressure, tightening with every line. I noticed how none of them addressed what I'd actually said. There was no explanation of the money, no proof, just insistence. I didn't respond. An hour passed. Then two. I went for a short walk, needing to move my body before my thoughts spiraled completely. The air was crisp, grounding. I reminded myself of what I knew. I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't agreed to anything. I was allowed to say no. When I got back, my phone buzzed again. If you don't send the money today, we will involve authorities. I read it 3 times. Authorities. My chest tightened, and for a moment, the old fear flared, hot and immediate. The fear of being in trouble, of being misunderstood, of authority siding with them by default because they were my parents and I was just a kid who didn't know better. I sat down on the couch and forced myself to breathe slowly, in through my nose, out through my mouth. I thought about the messages I had saved, the lack of evidence, the calmness of my responses. I thought about how unreasonable this all sounded when I stepped back from it. I typed one last message. I'm not sending the money. If you believe there's a legal issue, you're free to pursue it. I didn't add anything else. No defense. No emotion. Just fact. I sent it and immediately muted the conversation. The silence afterward felt strange. Heavy. Like the pause after a door closes but before you hear the lock click. I didn't know what they would do next. Only that something had changed. I had crossed from compliance into refusal, and there was no pretending otherwise now. That evening, I tried to distract myself. Watched a show, scrolled mindlessly, ate dinner without tasting it. Every so often, a new message preview would flash on my screen before disappearing into silence. I didn't open them. I went to bed with my phone on the nightstand, screen down. Sometime after midnight, it buzzed once more. This time, it wasn't from them. It was a number I didn't recognize, and my stomach dropped as I realized what that might mean. The knock came the next morning, sharp and deliberate, like it already knew it wouldn't be ignored. I froze where I was standing, toothbrush halfway to my mouth, foam dripping into the sink. For a split second, I convinced myself it was a neighbor, or a delivery, anything normal. The knock came again. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and walked slowly toward the door, my heart beating so loudly I could feel it in my throat. Through the peephole, I saw 2 uniforms. My knees went weak. I opened the door just enough to speak. "Can I help you?" "Good morning," one of them said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "Are you my name?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "We're here because we received a call regarding a financial dispute," he continued. "May we talk with you for a moment?" The words blurred together, financial dispute. I stepped back and let them in, my apartment feeling instantly too small, too exposed. They stood near the door, not touching anything, not intimidating in posture. Still, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The second officer glanced around briefly, then back at me. "We just want to understand what's going on." I swallowed. "My parents are asking me for money," I said. "I don't owe it." I told them no. The first officer nodded, like he'd already heard versions of this story before. "They said you were refusing to repay a loan." "A loan I never agreed to," I said quickly, panic creeping into my voice. "There's no contract, no documentation. They helped me years ago and never said it had to be paid back." He held up a hand, not to stop me, but to slow me down. "Okay," he said. "Let's take this one step at a time." I explained everything. The graduation they skipped, the sudden demand, the messages. I showed them my phone, scrolling through the thread, my fingers clumsy. I half expected skepticism, judgment, something that would confirm my worst fears. Instead, the officer read quietly, his expression neutral. "Did you ever sign anything?" he asked. "No." "Did they ever tell you, in writing or verbally, that this money was a loan at the time?" "No." He nodded again and handed the phone back to me. "This is a civil matter," he said. "And from what you're describing, there's no evidence of a crime on your part." The words hit me like a wave. "So, I'm not in trouble, I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. No, he said plainly. You haven't done anything wrong. Something in my chest loosened. Not completely, but enough that I could breathe again. The second officer spoke up. We also want you to know that calling the police doesn't create a debt. It doesn't make something legal just because someone says it is. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes despite my best efforts to stay composed. Did they tell you they were going to call us? He asked. Yes, I said. They said there would be consequences. The first officer's jaw tightened slightly. I'm sorry they put you through that. That was it. That simple sentence cracked something open. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was the first time anyone had acknowledged that this was unfair. They stayed only a few more minutes, explaining that no further action would be taken. That if my parents continued to harass me, I had the right to document it. That I was allowed to say no. After they left, the apartment felt eerily quiet. I locked the door and leaned my forehead against it, my whole body trembling now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, breathing in shallow bursts. My phone buzzed. A message from my parents. We hope you're happy. This didn't have to get ugly. Ugly. I stared at the word, anger finally rising to meet the fear. They called the police on me, on their own son, over money I didn't know, and somehow they still saw themselves as the wronged ones. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new note on my phone and started documenting everything. Dates, times, exact wording. I took screenshots. I saved voicemails. It felt surreal, like I was preparing a case against people who were supposed to protect me. But beneath the shock, something else was forming. Clarity. They hadn't called the police because they thought I'd committed a crime. They'd called because they thought it would scare me. And for the first time, I saw just how far they were willing to go to regain control. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the officers standing in my doorway. Polite, professional, detached. Not angry, not accusing, just factual. The opposite of how my parents had described authority my entire life. The contrast kept my mind awake. Around midnight, I got up and turned on the lamp in the corner of my living room. The light felt harsh against the darkness, but I needed it. I needed to see clearly. I pulled my laptop onto the coffee table, opened a fresh document, and titled it with my full name and the date. That alone felt strange, like I was stepping into a role I'd never planned to play. I started from the beginning. Graduation day. The time I arrived. The seats I saved. The text that came hours later. I wrote it all down carefully, neutrally, the way the officer had spoken to me. No emotion, just facts. Then I moved on to the money. The exact wording of the first demand. The way the amount appeared without context. The shift in tone once I asked for proof. As I copied messages into the document, a pattern began to emerge. Not just in this situation, but across years. I remembered other moments that suddenly made sense. Times I'd been praised for being easy, for not causing trouble, for understanding when plans changed or promises dissolved. I realized how often love had arrived tied to compliance. I pulled up my bank statements and attached screenshots showing my balance, my expenses, the reality of my situation. Not because I planned to show them to anyone, but because I needed to remind myself what was real. That saying no wasn't selfish. It was necessary. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my parents. We were just trying to help you learn a lesson. You forced our hand. I didn't respond. Instead, I added it to the document. The more I documented, the steadier I felt. Each screenshot, each date was like placing a weight on the floor beneath me. Grounding. Proof that this wasn't all in my head. That I wasn't being dramatic or ungrateful or immature. Around 2 in the morning, I called my aunt, my mother's sister. I hadn't planned to. My finger hovered over her name before I pressed call. When she answered, her voice was soft with sleep. I'm sorry to call so late, I said. I need to ask you something. I explained briefly what had happened. The skipped graduation. The demand. The police. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. They did this to you? She finally asked. Yes. Another pause. Then a sigh. I wish I could say I was surprised. The words landed heavier than anything else had that day. She didn't go into details. She didn't trash them. She just said, they've always used pressure when they don't get their way. She told me I wasn't wrong, that I should keep records, that I should protect myself. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the document on my screen. It was longer now, heavier, and clearer. This wasn't about $3,500. It was about what happened when I didn't fall back into line. The realization didn't come with relief. Came with grief. Grief for the parents I thought I had. Grief for the version of love I'd been chasing. I let myself feel it then, quietly, tears sliding down my face without drama or noise. By the time the sun started to rise, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to argue anymore. I wasn't going to explain myself into exhaustion. I would respond once more clearly and then I would step back. I typed the message as the light crept through the blinds. I've been advised that this is a civil matter and that I have no legal obligation to pay money I don't owe. I'm asking you to stop contacting me about this. Any further communication should be in writing. I read it twice, then I sent it. The reply came faster than I expected. You think you're so smart now? Don't forget who you're talking to. I added it to the document. As I closed my laptop, exhaustion settled into my bones. But beneath it was something new. Not confidence. Not peace. Awareness. I finally understood that the police call wasn't the worst thing they'd done. It was just the first time they'd shown me who they really were. I didn't expect to hear from them again so soon. After everything, the police, the messages, the thinly veiled threats, I assumed they'd either go quiet or double down in writing. I was wrong. The call came late afternoon, from my mother's number. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. A minute later, it rang again. Then my father's number flashed across the screen. I shouldn't have answered, but something in me wanted to hear it. Not to argue. Not to defend myself. I wanted to understand how they were justifying this, to themselves, if not to me. I hit accept and put the phone on speaker, setting it on the table between my hands like a fragile object. We just want to talk, my mother said immediately, her voice softer than it had been in days, careful, controlled. I'm listening, I said. My father jumped in. This has gone way too far. We didn't want police involved. You left us no choice. The familiar twist of blame tightened in my chest. I didn't call them, I said. You did. A pause. Not denial. Just recalculation. We were worried, my mother said. You've been acting different. Defensive. We thought maybe we needed something on record. Something on record. The words landed slowly, like snow piling up before you realize the road is gone. What do you mean? I asked, already feeling the answer take shape. Well, she said, clearing her throat. If this ever became a bigger issue, if you kept refusing to cooperate, it's important there's documentation, that we tried to handle this responsibly. I didn't speak. I was afraid if I did, my voice would give me away. My father continued, more irritated now that the explanation was out. You're young. You don't understand how these things work. We were protecting ourselves. Protecting themselves. From me. I felt something click into place then. So cleanly it almost hurt. The police call wasn't about recovering money. It wasn't even about punishment. It was about leverage. About establishing a narrative where I was unreasonable, ungrateful, uncooperative. Where they were the concerned parents trying to manage a difficult adult child. That's why you skipped my graduation, I said quietly. It wasn't a question. Silence stretched on the line. That has nothing to do with this, my mother said too quickly. It does, I said. You didn't show up for me, but you showed up when you wanted control. My father scoffed. Don't twist this. I'm not twisting anything, I said, surprised by how steady I sounded. You didn't ask for the money. You demanded it. And when I said no, you tried to scare me. Another pause. He exhaled sharply. You're being dramatic. There it was. The old dismissal. but it didn't land the way it used to. "I'm not paying you," I said, "and I'm not continuing this conversation." My mother's voice sharpened. "So that's it? You're cutting us off now?" "No," I said. "I'm setting boundaries." The word felt strange and solid in my mouth. "We're your parents," she snapped. "You don't get to do that." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was revealing. In that sentence, she'd said everything. "I do," I replied. "And I am." I ended the call before they could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear driving it. It was adrenaline mixed with clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at my dark phone screen. I replayed the conversation in my head, not to second-guess myself, but to memorize it. The slip, the admission, the truth hidden in plain language. Something on record. They hadn't wanted resolution. They'd wanted a trail. That night, I added the call to my document, writing down everything I could remember while it was still fresh. The phrases, the pauses, the tone. When I finished, I closed the laptop and rested my hands on it, like I was sealing something shut. I knew then that the relationship I'd been trying to salvage no longer existed. Maybe it never had. And I knew the next step wasn't confrontation. It was distance. Because once you see control clearly, you can't unsee it. And once you stop reacting, it loses its power. It didn't hit me all at once. There was no dramatic realization, no single sentence that unlocked everything. It came quietly, in pieces, over the next few days. Small memories resurfacing and rearranging themselves into something I couldn't ignore anymore. I was folding laundry when it started. A sock in my hand, my mind drifting, when I suddenly remembered being 16 and wanting to go on a weekend trip with friends. I'd been excited, careful, respectful when I asked. My parents had said yes, then spent the entire week reminding me how much trouble it was. Gas money, worry, trust. By the time the trip arrived, I felt so guilty I offered to stay home. They'd sighed with relief. At the time, I thought that meant I was considerate. Now, standing there with damp clothes and that memory burning suddenly bright, I understood something else. Compliance had always been the reward. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the laundry forgotten. More moments surfaced. College decisions they'd supported only if I chose what they preferred. Help that came wrapped in reminders. Praise that arrived only when I didn't push back. Silence when I needed reassurance. Attention when I needed permission. Even the graduation made sense now. They hadn't skipped it because it wasn't important. They'd skipped it because it didn't involve them. It was my achievement, my moment. No leverage in it. No role to play except proud spectators. And that role didn't give them control. But money, authority, fear, those brought them rushing in. The police call wasn't an overreaction. It was consistent. That realization hurt more than anything else so far. Because it meant this wasn't a sudden breakdown in our relationship. It wasn't stress. It wasn't miscommunication. It was a system. One I'd been living inside for years without language for it. That night, another message came through. "We don't know who's putting these ideas in your head," my mother wrote. "But this isn't you." I stared at the sentence, my chest tight. It was almost impressive how perfectly it fit the pattern. If I disagreed, I must be influenced. If I resisted, I must be confused. My independence could only exist as a malfunction. I didn't reply. The next message followed quickly. "We're willing to move past this if you just send part of the money." As a gesture, there it was. The olive branch that wasn't an apology. The compromise that required my submission. The invitation back into the system rebranded as peace. For the first time, I didn't feel tempted. Instead, I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that needs sleep, but the kind that comes from holding a position that was never meant to be sustainable. I realized how much energy I'd spent managing their emotions, anticipating reactions, preemptively softening myself. Saying no hadn't broken the relationship. It had exposed it. I opened my document one last time, scrolling through pages of messages, dates, notes. It read like a quiet case study. Not dramatic, not explosive, just consistent pressure, escalating when obedience stopped. I added one final line at the bottom, pattern established. Then I closed it. The next morning I blocked their numbers. Not forever, maybe. I didn't need to decide that yet. Just for now. For space. For silence that wasn't weaponized. For breathing room that didn't come with conditions. The absence that followed was strange. Unsettling. But also calm. No buzzing phone. No threats dressed up as concern. No sudden demands. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Even as grief sat heavy in my chest. I mourned them then. Not the people they were, but the parents I'd believed I could earn by being good enough. That night, I took my graduation photo out of my bag. The one taken on stage. Just me. Smiling too tightly. Eyes bright with something that looked like hope. I looked at it for a long time. I realized something important. They hadn't taken that day from me. I'd still shown up. I'd still crossed the stage. I'd still earned the degree. Their absence had hurt, but it hadn't erased me. For the first time since all of this began, I felt something close to resolve. Not anger, not revenge. Just the quiet understanding that my life didn't need their permission to move forward. And that understanding changed everything. Blocking their numbers didn't feel like relief at first. It felt like standing in a room where the noise had just stopped. Your ears still ringing, your body waiting for the next impact. I kept reaching for my phone out of habit, expecting a vibration that never came. Each time I had to remind myself. This quiet was intentional. I didn't announce it to anyone. I didn't post about it. I didn't frame it as a decision I was proud of yet. It was just something I did so I could breathe without bracing. The first boundary I set was silence. Not the dramatic kind. Just no responses. No explanations. No preemptive apologies. I told myself I'd revisit it in a week. Then another. Time stretched differently without the constant pull of their expectations. In that space, I started doing practical things. Small, grounding steps that made me feel like I was building something instead of defending myself. I updated my budget. I moved money into a separate savings account they didn't know about. I changed a few passwords. Not out of paranoia, but out of clarity. I was allowed to protect my own life. I told my landlord about the police visit, just in case. He listened quietly and said, "You did the right thing by documenting. No judgment, no lecture, just matter-of-fact reassurance." Surprised me how much that meant. I also told one friend the full story, every detail without minimizing. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "That's not normal." Hearing it out loud felt like permission to stop pretending it was. A week passed. Then another. Eventually, a message came through anyway, an email this time. My mother. Subject line. "Can we reset?" I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The tone was softer now. Reflective. Almost apologetic, but not quite. "We don't want to fight. We just want our family back. Let's put this behind us." There was no mention of the police. No acknowledgement of fear or pressure. No apology for the graduation. Just a request to return to normal as they defined it. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I wrote down what normal had cost me. Anxiety, self-doubt, constant vigilance. I asked myself a question no one had ever encouraged me to ask before. What do I need to feel safe in this relationship? The answer was clear. I drafted a reply, short and unembellished. I'm open to talking in the future, but only without financial demands or threats. I need time and space right now. I sent it and closed my laptop. The response came a day later. "You're overreacting." I didn't answer. That was the moment I understood what boundaries really were. They weren't about controlling other people's behavior. They were about deciding what I would participate in, what I would respond to, what I would accept as normal. I didn't block the email. I didn't need to. The power wasn't in cutting them off. It was in no longer contorting myself to fit their comfort. Over the next few weeks, life continued in small, ordinary ways. I went to work. I cooked simple meals. I framed my diploma and hung it above my desk. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that I could finish something even when support didn't show up. I started making plans without factoring them in. Where I might move next year, what kind of work I wanted, how I wanted my life to feel. Occasionally, guilt would surface. It always did. A voice asking if I was being too harsh, if I'd regret this later. When that happened, I went back to the facts. The messages, the knock on the door, the fear in my chest. Boundaries weren't punishment. They were protection. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for my parents to approve of my choices before making them. I was learning slowly, imperfectly, how to be an adult on my own terms. The quiet victory wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just this. I stopped arguing with people who benefited from my silence. And that changed the shape of my future.